astrology will show you where there are patterns of possible conflict, or like if there's high energy here or low energy, a stuck energy. It's almost how I think of it, as I've seen it over time, is that like every sign is almost like an atomic element.
I'd like to welcome back to the show, Ned Matinnia. Ned, welcome back. How are you today?
Thank you. I am feeling pretty busy, and in fact, the whole day, like I've told everyone, I have a full plate. And in terms of astrology, I'm looking at our current moon and Venus. They are in Virgo, which is all about tasks, chores, work, basically taking care of a business. And I am totally feeling that at the moment.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And thank you for sharing that. So, last time you were on the show, we talked about near-death experiences and your experience with near-death experiences and the group that you have created on Facebook. But today we're going to totally switch gears and talk about astrology. So, my first question for you is, what was it that sparked your interest in learning about astrology?
That's really interesting in how I ended up into astrology, because it was kind of like a, a random accident. I always have a, a scientific mindset, and at the time I found astrology, I was practically an atheist. I'm a huge science nerd, and so a magazine, entertainment, um, quotes about astrology, or a little horoscopes are not as interesting. I and so um, if that was all I saw, I probably wouldn't have ever became interested in astrology. I I started reading these long essays on the internet, and it was almost like something intellectual, written by wise men over time. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Um, and it talked about each sign and different properties of it, and talked about our solar system and cosmos and the meaning of the universe and everything, which I found interesting as kind of an open-minded skeptic. And so I thought it was interesting, and then I was curious. Oh, I wonder which one I am, because if you read about Aries or Taurus or Gemini, each of them has particular properties and feelings, attitudes, energy. And so then I looked up my birthday, found out that I'm a Gemini, which, it's what's interesting too is the more that I looked at my own chart, the more I realized my own chart is explaining my love of finding all this out, like a curiosity. Gemini energy is a thinker. It's an air sign, and it's often a speaker, a writer. And then when I looked at my whole chart, like I have a lot of air. Sun, moon, Jupiter is in air in my chart. But and perhaps other things I'm forgetting. But anyway, as I got into astrology, I remember in high school, I started asking everyone their birthdays, and I looked them up, and I was analyzing everyone, like, is this accurate? Is it actually saying, like, could there be something to this? And over time, I felt like I did see patterns. And of course, you have to look at the whole chart. One thing that a lot of people who are not familiar with astrology aren't aware of is that, like, if you say I'm an Aries, that is only one small part of the whole chart. And also I'll explain, when a person says that I'm an Aries, what they mean is that at the time they were born, the sun was in the constellation of Aries as viewed from Earth. And so, and even that isn't quite completely accurate, because there are the actual constellations which are within the sidereal zodiac, and then there are the Western signs, which are actually not as much based on the constellations as based on seasons. And so equinoxes, solstice, Aries is always exactly at spring equinox. Libra starts at autumn equinox. And so everything is actually based on the Earth and where it is in relation to the sun and its own slant. And so it's very interesting. But anyway, to answer your question, that's how I got interested. It was in high school when I was like, I wonder what this is about. Started asking everyone and just observing everyone over time.
Yeah. Well, I'm a lot like you. I am a Gemini as well, and I'm very curious. I've always had kind of an interest in astrology, especially after reading what characteristics a Gemini had, but I've never dived in. And then you read my chart and I was blown away. And so my next question is why? Like, how, why? I'm not even sure what the question is, but like, how does the time and the location of where we're born in relationship to all the stars, how is it so accurate? I mean, you read my chart and I felt like you knew me forever, and that blew me away. So tell me how you did it.
Well, and so the question of why or how is something that even the expert astrologers don't exactly know, like a scientific mechanism. And so like one thing I'll say is that, like, to sum it up, it's we don't know how it works, just that it works.
Got it.
And so perhaps it's almost like a future science. And actually, I call astrology a spiritual science, because it is. And I also call it the ultimate psychological tool. It's like a blueprint, and it basically connects us as spiritual beings who have lives on Earth to the Earth, and also our solar system and the larger cosmos. And so, something interesting about near-death experiences is that I've seen over the years how certain experiencers who were not spiritual at all, or even into astrology, or ever thought about it, come back and they've learned, like, oh, there is a connection between, like, everything in the universe, including us on Earth, including our solar system and our galaxy and everything. So have you ever heard the saying, as above, so below?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a famous quote from mystical circles, and I've heard even some experiencers mention it in terms of, like, they actually saw how what's happening in, like, the cosmos is mirroring what's happening, like, on our inside. And I also say that, when I study astrology, like, it's not just for humans, animals, like everything. So if you have a pet who's an Aries, who has a lot of Aries energy will often have a lot of high energy, action oriented. But again, you have to look at the whole chart, because I can hear a person in the audience who's like, well, I have a cat who's an Aries, and she's always shy and quiet. Well, she could have a Cancer moon. And so you have to look at the whole chart.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. I love that you brought in evidence from near-death experiences. I just recently interviewed a woman who had a near-death experience, and she went on this journey to many planets. And what she came back with was a very clear experience and knowledge that that there are celestial bodies, and that we are just like the stars, and in fact that we are made of stardust. And so I love that you brought in the near-death experiences. Now, you mentioned astrology as like a spiritual psychology, and I know that I have done this myself years ago, but I know that sometimes when I am in a conversation about astrology, people get it mixed up with astronomy. What is the difference between astronomy and astrology?
This is a great question in terms of like people in science get frustrated about this topic a lot. And so basically astrology, or I'll start with astronomy. Astronomy is the more a quantitative science, in terms of like you have a planet with a certain mass and a orbit, and it has its colors. It's made of certain rock. It's looking at the science or the physical properties of it. And so up until so far, our mainstream science tends to only focus on physical properties of things, and so the quantitative properties of them, meaning numbers or data. But then astrology is the opposite, which is a qualitative. And so that is the qualities of it, like feelings of it, impressions of it, things that are not exactly measurable with like an instrument or a device, things that are actually felt on the inside. So astrology is knowing that if there's a strong Mars in aspect out there, people are going to feel charged up in high energy. Astronomy is knowing, oh, it's actually in its orbit, it's a closer than usual.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. It actually explains why I've never really gotten interested in astronomy, because I'm not into the quantitative as much as I am into the qualitative. So thank you for explaining that. You've mentioned a couple of times that like with the cat or with yourself, that just the sun sign is not enough. So I do know a lot of people, I up until you read my chart, I could have been that person. I mean, I knew a little bit about my chart, but I didn't really put together the different pieces, like my moon and the other pieces that are in my chart, with matching them with the qualities of my personality. So I'm curious, like, it's a common misconception that just your sun sign kind of is your whole chart. I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Yeah, well, and so in my own journey about this, after I learned that I'm a Gemini sun sign, I eventually found a website where you can enter your birth information, which is your day, your time, city, and then it will calculate everything else. And so it'll calculate your whole chart. And the first time I saw my whole chart, which is like a circle, and with these symbols all around it, and the symbols are planets, and they're also sun and moon, and they're often asteroids as well, which I want to add a point about this. And so one thing that lends a certain validity about this all is that what I've seen with astrology is that it's not limited to planets that humans label as planets. Like every asteroid in the solar system, you ultimately find has a kind of meaning in a chart. And so, I mean, there's actually an asteroid called Rockstar. And so if you see a person who has that in their chart at a high angle or strongly aspected, they'll have that energy of like Rockstar. Certain people are like that. Some people are the opposite. And so, and I want to add too, because a lot of people say that, astrology is too general and they can apply to anyone. But the deeper you look at charts and people, you find that no, there are clearly people who are one way, people who are the opposite. And there are people who are in between. And in the ones in between, the charts will actually also say that. So, but to your question about, to remember.
Like if my sun sign is a Gemini and there's a little write-up explaining what Geminis are, like that's not the only thing that dictates my personality.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so for anyone out there who's interested in looking at your own chart or your own energy, people often talk about the big three: sun, moon, and rising. And so looking at those will help a lot, because like in my case, even though I have a lot of air, which I have air sun and air moon, my rising is earth. It's Taurus, which is slow and kind of quiet, introverted. And so a lot of people have said or picked up on the fact that I'm usually introverted and quiet and peaceful. And oftentimes intuitives, like when I say intuitives, I mean psychics or people just who feel energy, have asked or guessed if I was an earth sign or water sign. And I can definitely see, because I have a lot of that energy in my chart, it's how you are or how people see you is more about which energies are strongest in your whole chart. You could be a Gemini with a whole lot of earth, or you could be a Libra with tons of water and just be extremely emotional in comparison to average. So looking at your sun, moon, and rising, also your part of fortune, and many websites will calculate this. It's a mathematical combination of your sun, moon, and rising. And so it's almost like if you had to summarize a person in a point, it is there. And so mine is in Aquarius in the 9th house, which is basically a scientific truth seeker who is interested in humanity and the universe, which is totally who I am, like in a deep way.
Yeah. Gosh, all of this is so fascinating. And as you were explaining the different, like the circle and where the planets are in relationship to where you were on Earth, I just saw how expansive that was. Like no two people have the same chart. Would that be correct?
Mostly.
Yeah.
Except for identical twins. And so they are actually important study subjects in terms of astrology, because I'm not that familiar in terms of like the trends in them, but I think I've heard of cases where you have twins who are identical, who were born at the same time, who have completely different personalities. But I think I've also heard the opposite. I think I've heard of ones which they have a very, very similar personalities. So, it's an interesting area of research. And I'll say that even in cases, if there are twins like that who seem different on the surface, oftentimes it could be uh, uh, that their energy, is similar. It's just expressing itself in a different angle, a different direction, um, of that same underlying impulse or urge.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually did some reading yesterday in preparation for this interview on identical twins. So I love that you brought that in. Uh, so I'm actually really curious about your perspective on this, because there's so many people are not interested in astrology unless it's in relationship to relationships. So one of the common myths, I know people get really like, oh wow, like I'm a Gemini, what am I compatible with? And they want to check that out. But there's a lot of people that say that it doesn't actually even matter. What is your perspective? Does your chart being compatible with a romantic partner, does it matter or does it not matter?
This is an important and a common question in terms of yeah. I have also seen this a lot in terms of people's interest in astrology because of it. And one thing that I have learned from this, in terms of looking at people's interactions, or the interaction of their energy patterns, is that it matters, however, not always in the way that people want, in terms of like, is this person good for me or not? Astrology will show you where there are patterns of possible conflict, or like if there's high energy here, or low energy, stuck energy, or it's almost, how I think of it, as I've seen it over time, is that like every sign is almost like an atomic element from the periodic table. And so in humans, or souls, including animals, are made of combinations of these. And so if a person has lots of fire and air, those are certain types. And so, and if someone else has other energy, it's almost like atoms which are interacting. And sometimes you have reactions that are basically not much happens. It's almost like the elements are just okay. Sometimes it's a huge explosion. Sometimes it's like a attraction repulsion. Like, it's interesting how physics, like it's interesting how properties of matter actually mirror people's energies with each other, or animals also. Certain people have like a strong attractions to certain pets, and the personalities are very bonded. Others are, it's just okay, it's just like, well, I have a pet, I feed him, but there isn't a whole lot of like soul interest. And so, to answer your question, the charts show us what kinds of reactions will be normal or natural, like if it's going to be like a explosive energy or a calm energy or a combination, everyone always has free will to try to handle that in the highest way. Meaning, if there are people who have a naturally high energy clashes, which are possible, they can consciously choose and work on using those situations for growth, rather than just like attacking each other over time, or just like being so volatile and kind of dysfunctional. I hope that helped, because this is a whole topic in its own right.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to paraphrase, or not paraphrase, because I don't know if I can use the words you use, but I'm going to say back to you what I think I understood. So the chart in itself is a tool, and naturally there are different charts that would be an easy compatibility that might have a lot of harmony. And because we're human and we have free will, if there's someone over here that's not, the chart is not compatible with this person, they can still choose, and the chart can be like a tool for insight to navigate that relationship together.
Exactly. And
Okay.
exactly. And oftentimes it's a combination, and also oftentimes is that, like, I've seen when there is too much harmony, it's almost like things are too perfect and it becomes boring. It's like, well, everything is cool, but, and so the best or the happiest relationships often have like a mix of like the hard ones and the easy ones. When it's too challenging, or people's natures are just too fundamentally different, it just takes a lot of effort on both parts. And if one of the person's interested in making it work and the other isn't, it just falls apart. That's on one end. But astrology will also tell you things like sexual chemistry or not, or mind chemistry or not, or heart, a moon. So like, it's interesting how astrology almost teaches us how physical matter interacts with a soul or a spirit, because our bodies are physical. Attraction often is a mixture of chemical, physical, emotional. So it's like, it's this interface of all of that. So
Yeah. I mean, attraction, a lot of attraction has to do with our subconscious and, uh, what's going to bring us our highest healing. So like, I could only imagine how that adds into the mix of the chart. So the chart is a tool to help navigate. I want to move into, because I love this conversation, and there's a lot of buzz on social media. I think it's really mainstream right now, the topic of like Mercury retrograde or planets in retrograde. And it's kind of like the collective energy where if something's in retrograde, it's like, disaster is going to happen. And I have actually had the opposite. When Mercury is in retrograde in Gemini, things like are amazing for me. So, is a retrograde, Mercury retrograde, or any planet retrograde, is it bad?
It's actually, it's a time of reflection and a time of extra care and focus, of dotting the I's, crossing T's. And so for a person like yourself who has Virgo moon and who's interested in taking care it's actually helpful, because it's like if the energy is supporting that whole thing of like looking over everything over, maybe even twice, and kind of ensuring everything is proper, because the people who struggle in retrogrades, such as Mercury retrograde, and I'll say that almost every planet eventually retrogrades. Currently, we have, I think, Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, I think, are all retrograde now. But anyway, and so when Mercury is retrograde, people who are more impulsive, or who kind of just like throw a caution to the wind and don't verify things, or make things foolproof, like when it comes to contracts or plans or anything like that, because all those are ruled by Mercury, oftentimes have issues, because one of those things comes up and bites them. It's like, oh, if I only checked my oil in the car before driving across the whole country, I would have, prevented this breaking my engine or
Right.
something like that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really curious now, and I can't remember what it was you said that sparked my curiosity in this, but we've been talking about astrology as it can assist or help with on an individual level or in a relational level. I'm curious how, if and how astrology can help us navigate with the collective, like some things that are happening currently in the world. Like before we press record, you mentioned something that happened 2 days ago. I'd love it if you could talk about that.
Oh yeah, yeah. So something about astrology that over time keeps proving itself over and over again. And I feel like as a scientist at heart, I'm always questioning it. And I'll also add, like, I first got into astrology a long time ago, and since then I question it. I'm like, well, is this actually, is this because I want to believe in it, or is it? And over time, it proves itself. And so, in terms of our current situation in the world, what's happening in the Middle East, Israel, Gaza, Palestine, and whatnot. If I remember correctly, the violence started up the other day. I think just over the weekend or something. I forget when. And even as it was happening, I was kind of surprised, because when seeing current events, I often look at where is the moon or sun, or what aspects are happening between planets. And an aspect is an angle. And so, like, when you look up in the sky and sun is over here, and then moon is exactly like 90 degrees, that is a square, as an example. And so aspects or angles have certain energies. But when I saw the news start up about this, I thought, well, we just entered into a Libra, which is actually one of the more peaceful signs. It's about people socializing, gathering. It's a social energy. And I think at that time, the moon was also in. It was either, I think it was in Leo, which is likes to play and have fun, and so it was an interesting energy, and but it contrasted with what was happening. And then I realized, I looked at the planets, I'm like, oh, there it is. We have Mars exactly squaring Pluto, which are the two like war planets or energies. And so Mars is all about war, action, aggression, fighting. Pluto is intensity, power. It's like it's like, even though Pluto is a tiny planet, and people have said, is it even a planet at all? But for how small it is, it like has the energy of like a nuclear bomb. So if you have Mars squaring, which is actually a challenging aspect to Pluto, it's explaining exactly what is happening in terms of the intensity that the terrorists caused in Israel, and the intensity that Israel is just wiping out entire buildings. It's just like this whole mindset of just like kill everything. And so that energy of Mars square Pluto, which is still happening, is correlating with everything that is happening over there right now.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, and I don't know if you can answer this. It just came up as a curiosity. If Pluto and Mars are square now, as time moves and the planets move and everything revolves, I don't know if I'm using correct like language or not, but will that like war energy subside?
Yes, and that's an excellent observation in terms of everything is always evolving, everything is always moving, and also everything comes in cycles. And so you'll often see in people, in public, in a society over history, as planets shift over time, societies, norms, and beliefs and values will often change too. And so if you look at the larger or the farther planets, including, let's say, Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, those planets take many years to rotate around our sun. And so for Earth, it's 1 year. I think Jupiter, well, I think Mars is 4 years, something like that. Jupiter, 20 years. Saturn, I think it's 30 years. And then if you go all the way out to Pluto, it's 248 years. And so as these planets are slowly moving and evolving, people's feelings and moods are changing. So with this Mars square Pluto now, it probably, like, I actually on my other computer, I have a program where you can actually move through time and watch how everything changes. But this a particular aspect over the coming days and weeks will fade out. And over time, people naturally kind of get sick and weary of war. So these intense, like starting battles will probably not last forever. And but then there's, everything's always evolving, and of course people have free will. And so just because the natural background energy pattern isn't happening, which is basically what astrology is almost like the background energy influencing everyone. Even if that isn't in place, if people have strong mindsets of what's the word, revenge or fighting, they can, keep it up, even if the energy isn't there anymore.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. When you said the background energy, is that why sometimes we can feel like off or just like irritated or slow or and not know why? We can't like actually say, oh, in my life I did this, which is causing me to feel this way, and we're just kind of like, oh, what is that? Is that, they say, what's going on in the stars?
Exactly, and it is, and because this is actually one of the observations I've had for so long, and that keeps proving astrology is in effect. And actually, the other night, I was on a date, and it was a moon had been in Cancer, which is more sensitive, moody, nurturing. Um, um, and then suddenly in the evening time, I noticed, like, even in myself and everyone around in public, everyone was like high energy. People were speeding on the freeway, and it was just like, whoa, high energy. And even late into a nighttime, it was like the mood that was just present in everyone was high energy. And then I was pondering on it. I'm like, this is interesting. There has to be some either Mars or Uranus or Jupiter, um, um, I can't say the word, energy happening. And then I pulled out my phone. I checked the planets, and yes, we had a moon exactly square Mars, which is that high energy vibe, and it had also just entered into Leo. And so oftentimes I have seen over time how when planets, including the moon, shift into different signs, suddenly the mood changes, and it impacts everyone, because many people out there, they're not interested in astrology, or don't believe in it, or as if it's even possible, and yet they're all impacted. Everyone's impacted, whether we believe it or not. And so one thing I love about astrology is it's like, as a spiritual science, the more people who become aware of it, it's helpful, because it's almost like becoming aware of a hidden or invisible weather patterns. And so you can look at it and say, oh, I can understand what's happening more now. Also, like when you mentioned people feeling at times certain ways, whenever the moon enters into Taurus, all of a sudden everyone wants to just slow down and chill. And at times I felt that, and it can be like afternoon, and in my head I'm wondering, why is everything so just like just wanting to be inside and cozy, and I look, oh, moon's in Taurus, and I realize other people are also feeling it as well at that time.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and I just giggle because my daughter is a Taurus. So whenever you say that, it's like I can see it so clearly. So I'm curious about something, and so I'm gonna have to jump back a little bit, because you mentioned, like, when you were talking about how Pluto takes 240 something years to orbit the sun. It had me thinking of, like, what I understand is we're now in the age of Aquarius. So before that, were we in age of Capricorn? Like, what is that about? Like, I don't feel like my question sounds very intelligent. But
No, no, I can understand it. And actually, so those ages, from my understanding, are very long term ones, like spanning a millennia or thousands of years. But it's interesting you said that, because Pluto right now is on the edge of Capricorn and Aquarius, and even I think last year it briefly went into Aquarius, and then it did a retrograde into Capricorn, and now I think it'll soon, by next year, I think it could be in Aquarius again. But that doesn't exactly correlate to the larger cosmic ages, and so those, I've heard several theories on that, in terms of it could be related with the Earth and their precession of the equinoxes, and so I think that cycle changes every 26,000 years, and so I think perhaps that it could be part of it.
Yeah.
But but in terms of my current take on it now is that because our society is advancing, and we have so much technology and everything, electricity, which all started almost just over 100 years ago, and in that whole time, like we have advanced so much.
Yeah.
So I think, and if you look at the energy of Aquarius, and I always say that people are not signs. People will have blends of signs. And so when I talk about Aquarius, I'm not talking about all the Aquarius people out there. I'm talking about just the energy, or like if you picture a color, just the color Aquarius and the whole spectrum. Aquarius energy is scientific. It's into technology. It's into futuristic things. It's not interested in the current norms or the old traditions. It's like out with the old, in with the futuristic. So it's almost like just in that whole view, like how everything has advanced so much recently in human history. That also, it kind of ties into an age of Aquarius, or an age of technology. Mm-hmm. And a humanity, because Aquarius is a scientific, but it's also humanitarian. It looks at the whole Earth. It looks at like all the people on Earth, rather than like I am from this country and that's all I care about. No, it thinks I am from Earth and I care about everyone.
That's very cool. Thank you. I mean, all of this is just so fascinating. I could, talk about it for hours. And since you read my chart, I have spent a lot of time diving in. What if someone is interested in astrology and they're feeling a little overwhelmed because there's so many pieces to it, where would be the best place for them to get started?
I often recommend a website. It's called astro.com, and they have many free resources. You can enter your birth information in there, and it will tell you about your chart, your energy. It even has a feature called Astro Click Portrait, where it will show you a picture of your chart and all the planets, and you can click on the planets, and it will explain what it means. But also just Google, and like over time I've learned so much from like looking at my chart, and then I find out that I have a moon in Libra, and then I Google that, and you learn a lot. You can learn about your aspects, like squares, trines, oppositions. So And it really is a science. It's almost like learning a new system or language. But the a key about it is that it is almost all qualitative, meaning you have to use your intuition or your knowing. And I think as a person who is a scientist at heart, I think about like a time when our sciences on Earth are aware of and recognize that there is more than just physical properties or matter. And so and that intuition itself is something real and valid, because you can only really understand astrology if you can observe yourself in people and feelings. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. Like, that just made so much sense, that it's qualitative. So there has to be some reflection and intuition that is accompanied with it. So is there anything else that you would like to share about what we've talked about today, or what we haven't talked about today?
Well, yeah, like even in terms of how, well, like the whole piece about intuition, like I'll say that if near-death experiences and mediums show us how we truly are spirits, we're temporarily on Earth. If all of us are spirits, then all of us are intuitive. Everyone has intuition, even the most stubborn engineer type. And I'll say this because also, like, you can watch how the current energies influence people, especially the people who don't even believe in astrology, because you can watch them and be affected and react to it without knowing why. Or oftentimes, whenever the moon enters into a water sign, or like other strong water energy is present, oftentimes people become moodier and people become snippier, but only the people who are not aware of what's happening and who are operating in the more negative aspect. And we can always choose to act in the positive aspect. So for example, if the moon enters into Cancer and people are suddenly more sensitive and more emotional, the negative side of that is people get colder or more of a guard up. But then if a person's aware of what's happening, they can act in the positive energy of Cancer, which is nurturing, which is healing. It's supporting others and also protecting them. So when it comes to astrology, everyone is impacted, including animals, and learning about your energy patterns and your loved ones or pets patterns as well is incredibly enlightening, because it teaches us also that we aren't meant to be cookie cutters of like all equal. Like if a person is extremely emotional, like, oh, it's in their energy. And what is the highest expression of that? Like if a person is very intellectual and kind of a non-feeling, well, that person's okay too, because they have a lot of air energy, or perhaps a strong Saturn energy, and that has its own highest expression as well. So astrology and numerology, which is a whole separate topic, which, if you ever are interested in talking about it on here, I can also explain. But it's just like, it shows that it's okay that we're all different and special in our own ways.
Yeah. Thank you. I love how you explained that. And it was so beautiful. I'm not gonna, add to it. I'm just gonna say that it sounds like it's definitely worth paying attention to. So thank you so much. But again, I appreciate you taking your time. I know we're all so busy lately with the moon in Virgo, but just so grateful for you to, again, share your passions and your hobbies and your wisdom with the world. How do people find you?
On Facebook, find me in my near-death experiences group. If you go to, if you type in near-death experiences, or facebook.com/groups/return from death, and I'm on there, Ned Matinnia, and I'm also creating a Substack, and so eventually I want to write articles and posts on there as well. And I'm on Instagram at Ned Shares, one word. And yeah.
I'll be sure to include all of that in the description. So if they don't want to type, they can just click. And I'm sure I'll see you back soon. We'll chat about numerology. Thank you so much, Ned. It's been such a pleasure.
Hi, Christina.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.